Is Kirby Smart getting the most of his talent? This is a question that is, well, a really important one. Dean Legge with Matt DeBerry, dogpost.com. We enjoy y'all watching and listening. Make sure you go over to the website. Matt, I remember after the 2019 SEC championship game against LSU, I think Andy Staples asked Kirby this very question. And in 2020, it didn't look like they necessarily did get the most out of their talent. But what do you think? I mean, we're 5 years into this, and year six may have a lot to say about the answer to this question. But until you win the national championship, I think Kirby's going to get dinged.
Right. I do think he has talent, and he's proven that he's been able to develop that talent. We saw it in the NFL draft. But a question I see all the time, especially on Twitter from people, is, Kirby Smart does the least with the most. Everyone goes back and looks at the recruiting rankings. He recruits at a top three level, sometimes the top level.
Yeah.
And then you look at, that they haven't been able to win a championship. But if you go back and look at the talent that Florida State brought in just a few years ago that turned into nothing, go back and look at the classes that Southern Cal has signed, Texas. I mean, these are programs who recruit at a top 10 level and are barely, relevant college football. Kirby Smart recruits at a top three level, and he's built a top five program because of it. That's not much of a drop off at all. Tennessee recruits at a top 25 level, can't win 5 games. So when we're talking about coaches that do the least with the most, Kirby Smart is way, way, way far down that list. But it's kind of low-hanging fruit for a lot of fans because, they haven't won a national championship in so long, and we see the talent coming in and also coming out of Athens now.
So I think this is a really good topic, actually. And if you just want to hate on Kirby, which is I mean, you're more than welcome to do that. I think there's reason to be critical of Kirby. I think that this duo has we're not in love with Kirby. We're not going to unnecessarily hate Kirby. I mean, he's the head coach at Georgia. There are times that he should do better. There are times that he does really well. But I think, Matt, the criticism is not going to end until you win the national championship. And for Kirby, whenever they don't win the national championship, I think there's going to be criticism. Now, with that said, when you take a look at guys like, I mean, specifically Eric Stokes, Aziz Ojolari, guys like that, they've been very successful getting guys in and out into the NFL. They just haven't won the national championship. And that's not the same, that may seem like a similar discussion of you're not getting enough out of your talent. I would say he's not had the right quarterback to win the national championship. I mean, I think it's that simple. We heard this a lot when Mark Richt was the coach. I think there was some truth to that at the time. But Mark won a lot of games at Georgia. He just didn't win the national championship.
Yeah, Georgia has
We
won
don't
a
talk.
lot of games. Yeah, and they've won a lot of big games. They just haven't been the best team in the country. And maybe that will change soon. But I think there's a lot of people who are criticizing Kirby maybe a little too much about not winning a national championship in an era where Alabama still has a dynasty going on, in an era where Clemson football is at its very peak. They've never been better than this.
No.
You have Oklahoma turning out Heisman quarterbacks, first-round picks left and right. And then Ohio State they're a machine. They're there every single year. And Texas isn't going to be this Texas for very long. Southern Cal might come back. Miami's trying to come back. So it might be tougher and tougher for Georgia to win. So it kind of does need to be now. But he's not wasting the talent. It's not like he's bringing all this in and has nothing to show for it. He has a lot to show for it.
Well, I talk about Clemson a lot because I know that program relatively well, and Dabo Swinney is now considered a high level coach. I mean, I'm old enough to remember them getting smacked around by South Carolina, a team that was very good, a very good South Carolina team, and I'm also old enough to remember them having inexplicable losses, the same way that Oklahoma has inexplicable losses. But when you win the national title, it sort of washes that all away. The person I would say that most qualifies for the designation of doing the least with the most is Ed Orgeron. When you look at what LSU has had, I mean, there's just no excuse for them to go and win 4 or 5 games in a season. There's just no excuse for losing to Missouri. You look at Kirby's losses. He's not lost a lot of games. But this is just going on memory. You lose to Alabama in 2020. I don't think there's any shame in that. They lost to the best Florida team that's been around for a while. I don't know if they lose that game with a different quarterback or not. In 2000, 19, the loss to South Carolina is almost unexplainable with the exception of the 4 turnovers. You lose to LSU, another, you know, team that was just almost unstoppable. Those were their 2 losses in 19. In 18, they lose to LSU and they lose to Alabama. I mean, you know, in 2017, they lose to Auburn by like 1,000,000 points and then beat them, and they lose in the national championship game. I can go back to 2016, but that's not the sort of modern Georgia program. That would be like talking about Dabo losing to West Virginia 70 to whatever it was. I mean, I don't think he's got to win the national championship, Matt. I mean, how long have you and I been doing this now? 6 years, 5 years?
Long time.
Yeah.
It always comes down to that.
That's all it is.
And that's all it comes down to. But I do think he is developing as an X's and O's guys. He is getting these guys better. But I think we both said when he was hired, yeah, I think Kirby is going to win a national championship in the first 5 years. So there's definitely room for improvement as a coach. He's not Nick Saban. He's made mistakes. He's not perfect. So, for him to be, this guy that people think of that ruins the talent that comes through Athens is just not true. And I think we're going to see it in next year's NFL draft too. But when you do start to get 9, 10, 11 guys drafted in the NFL on a consistent basis, you really do need to have some national titles to back it up. And that's what Alabama's doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. And you could be talking about someone who is an exceptional coach at Georgia, and there's just someone else in the league that is all-time greatest coach of that particular sport. Andy Landers dealt with this. Now, Kirby, time will tell if Kirby's a better long-term coach than Andy Landers, who's the women's basketball coach at Georgia for 30 years. But he had to deal with Pat Summitt for 3 straight decades. He lost the national championship game, I believe, to Tennessee. And then Gino Auriemma came along, and basically it was Tennessee or Connecticut during Andy's heyday, particularly Tennessee. And I don't know, Kirby's got to do it. I mean, that's just all there is to it, man. I mean, he's got the resources and he's got the kids.
This might be the most complete team, and I think we've said that a bunch now, but it seems like every year they did have a team that could compete for a national championship but couldn't win it because maybe a piece wasn't there, mainly at quarterback, mainly in the secondary. There was always something wrong that, made them not the best team in the country. Could they be the best team in the country this year? Like you said, they have the resources, the talent. They've got the team. They've got the quarterback. Yeah. They've got returning coordinators. So they've got it on the talent and the staff to do it. They've got to do it, though. But eventually, it really does need to happen. I don't think Kirby Smart's ever going to be on the hot seat the way he's winning and kind of controlling the East. The jokes are going to keep coming, and the statements that aren't true are going to keep coming more and more that we see in the Twitter universe that everyone loves so much. Yeah.
So it's a little bit of, I mean, there is some truth to it. I think if you've recruited as well as he has, you need to come up with the goods. You need a national championship. There's also the reality of college football, which is that 2 of the top 5 teams or 4 teams in the country play in the same conference. Ohio State's not playing Clemson to go to the playoff. So Alabama and Georgia are doing that, and the one time that Alabama wasn't there, they got let in. But I do want to say this: you look at Alabama starting off their dynasty, they got beat by Florida. They had to get over the Florida hump. They did it in year 3 of Nick Saban, whatever it was. You look at Clemson. I mean, that program couldn't beat its arch rival, and not only that, but they were getting beat by double digits in games that really mattered at the time. That was an extremely painful time for the Clemson folks. You look at LSU; they had to beat Alabama to win the national championship in 2019, and they did. And for back to Clemson, they lost to Alabama the year before they won it. And, they were fortunate to be playing in the national championship the second year because of the disastrous loss that they had to Pittsburgh, I think it was, that same year.
Or Syracuse, one of the 2. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
one of them.
He's Oklahoma and Clemson. I'm not just going to say Clemson anymore. Oklahoma and Clemson both have losses that you just don't understand at times. But you play in the conference that you play in. And Georgia's going to have to defeat whoever it is that's in front of them. Matt Stinchcomb said the other day they might have to beat Clemson twice. I think they would take that if they're not having to beat Alabama twice to win the national championship. But we'll just see. Hey, we talk about this sort of stuff all the time over on dogpost.com. We would love for you to be there and check it out. Go to dogpost.com today. We'll see you over on the website.